Hello everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Today's talk is on a 21st century opera career. And it does come at a very difficult time for the arts. It's the United Kingdom, it's February 2021, and it's certainly a very interesting time. If I was to give this talk in 12 months, I'd be interested to know how my career has progressed, where the world of opera now sits, and how about the wider world of the arts in general. Opera is a very ambitious and probably the most expensive of all art forms, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. Although I've sometimes described the relationship that some people have with opera a bit like having your first cup of coffee. In the 21st century, it can feel a bit bitter tasting, not quite to our taste, not what our senses are used to. But we can become easily addicted. The more and more we taste, the more and more we like. The more we might want to gain a better understanding, to become a connoisseur even. For many, it can feel like an academic pursuit, whilst others are drawn almost exclusively to the way that opera makes us feel, the emotions, the way that the sung human voice has this ability to communicate directly to the very core of our heart. Of course, like all good art forms, opera exists to entertain, but even at its most frivolous, its aims are to explore human motivation, to explore emotion, and to explore the wider world. Themes can often be linked to politics or news stories of the day, but it can also be used to provoke thought about how we live our lives in general. And opera does this through a combination of factors, through music, through drama, through words, staging, design, movement, and the most sophisticated use of the human voice. As a performer, what first drew me to the art form was coming from a dance background originally, and then as a teenager desperately wanting to get into straight theatre. What opera offered me was an art form that felt like it was somewhere between the two. It wasn't quite the Stanislavskian naturalistic feel for text that I was seeking as a straight actor. And it was frustrating in some ways that some of the finer details of acting can perhaps get lost by a big stage. But it's such a powerful tool for communication. And you can slow that theatricality right down, working with the music. And you can use gesture as a dancer would, responding to the music. This slight slowing down is something that I think really sticks with me still. I really enjoy the time to build up real detail in a character. There's even time to absorb the wonderful music that surrounds you on stage. And there's time in preparation for a role to explore historical elements. You become almost like an archaeologist digging into the past to get a better understanding of why the music was written and what had happened historically or socially at the time around your character. So it feels like opera gives me both a creative output and also an academic interest. Opera has been around for a long time, for well over 400 years. We can trace the birth of opera back to the end of the 16th century. So in the 1580s, there were a group of intellectuals who were based in Italy, in Florence, and they were known as the Camerata. And like me, they were actually interested in wanting to explore combining art forms. But for them, they wanted to create a mixture of music and theatre along the lines of Greek drama, but they'd actually never seen Greek drama, of course. They had no exposure to it whatsoever. They had no idea what it was like. They obviously had no recordings in the day, and they had no way of knowing what it looked or sounded like. But this ideal came from a reaction against the musical trends of the day. They felt that music had become unnecessarily flowery, and I think what they were talking about here was the secular music, because on the other side of this, they also thought that the sacred music had become very austere. So the first opera was in effect simply sung or declaimed plays, and the vocal line was supported by a very simple accompaniment. And this accompaniment and the vocal line would try and reproduce the rhythms of natural speech. And in today's time in the industry, and if you know opera really well, you know that this type of singing is known as recitative speech singing. And it's definitely the first thing that comes back to me if any of my non-musical friends or any children that I know in my life want to try and make fun of me. So a lot of my friends and family would be like, "Hello, Sarah, how are you today?" And then, would expect me to respond with, "Hi, I'm fine." And you can carry on with your loved ones like that for ages. And it's probably quite a good thing to do during lockdown to keep you busy. It is that very early form of opera that people love to make fun of, if it's not for them particularly. And as opera evolves through the ages, we see this original idea and ideal revisited. And certainly for me, I'm most attracted to the Greek type ideal, that drama and the communication part of opera. But sometimes this Greek type of ideal is often corrupted or developed, let's say, into a different way, because what we see as we move on is an emphasis on purely musical and vocal beauty that comes in, particularly as we get into the 18th century and the 19th century, into what is known as the golden sort of bel canto period. So that's translated as beautiful singing. And this period was dominated by composers such as Donizetti and Bellini. We also start to see orchestras getting bigger, and so the texture and sound is thicker almost. It's a much more luxurious sound as we move through the periods. And that puts different demands on a singer, on a performer too. So in the early days of opera, the sound that were produced by opera singers was a much more pure tone, because they only had a few instruments to project their voices over. But as the orchestra starts to shift and to grow bigger, the voice has to change and develop to work with that, bearing in mind that no microphones had come into play until the 20th century. So it's really important to know that this development, so if you hear a voice, as we get to the larger orchestras, you'll start to hear the vibrato, so that slight wobble in an opera singer's voice, and that is to get across an orchestra. So going back to the start of this journey, if we want to explore who maybe was the grandfather of the development of opera, I would say someone like Monteverdi was so key to that. So Monteverdi was a very interesting composer, and his style changed a lot during his composing life. He wrote a number of operas, and that really did change, and it shows how rapidly this new style was developing. By the time we get to 1643 and his incoronation of Poppaea, this was a huge commercial success, and it was the first commercial success that we had seen in opera. And I believe that opera grew and developed from there. Opera sort of then starts to get quite nationalistic during the second half of the 17th century, with very different sounds for operas being produced by different countries. And that's because operas were often commissioned or attached to royal courts or palaces. So to start with, opera was very much for the noblemen, the royalty, but we could see that popularity was really shifting to the masses. If we hop forward a little bit to the 18th century, we start to see this real popularity for individual singers, and it was dominated particularly by the infamous castrati, those male singers who had been castrated in their youth to preserve their high voices. And they were famed for their combination of power, their amazing vocal agility, and their unearthly purity of tone. They were very widely documented as being absolute sort of megastars and causing havoc wherever they went. There were a lot of prima donna tendencies that were written about. And I think this sort of superstar factor really contributed to the success of opera as it grew during this time. These guys were like the Kardashians of their day. And unfortunately, we saw then sort of those Greek ideals, the drama started to become secondary to the fame as audiences chased celebrity singers, and this became a bigger deal. And opera started to be seen more as an important date in the social calendar more than anything else. And actually that sort of breaks my heart that this is something to some extent has continued to this day. Some audience members, it's not always about the art form, it's about being seen in the right place. And if we've been to the Royal Opera House or Glyndebourne, you know yourselves that sometimes that is sadly the case. So the bel canto period, this golden period, was a great vehicle for individual singers to show technique and to show stamina. And opera composers throughout time and still to this day have written with favourite singers in mind, granting these singers a gift of the greatest pieces of work. But I feel that something like the writing of Mozart feels so much more ensemble driven than many of the works written as we leave this golden bel canto period, which was then taken up and developed further in the Romantic style by composers such as Verdi. We start to see heroes and heroines being sort of explored in a really different way. Take La Traviata, for example, which was written in 1853. It's very romantic, and you can see as Verdi moves on through his career right to the end that he no longer writes in the same style that he once was. It's not about the set pieces for each singer. It becomes much more through composed. It's almost entirely continuous music, which piles on more emotion for the listener. And also it hooks us in again to the hero and heroine roles. And these important characters are the things that make the singers of the day, and still even into the 20th century, these singers stars. And we can't talk about Verdi without talking about Puccini. I mean, gosh, everyone loves Puccini. Highly effective music with sort of tear-jerking drama in works like La Bohème, written in 1896. And a lot of people talk about La Bohème being their sort of secret favourite opera. And for me, there's no secret at all. I think Puccini has this ability to tap into the audience's emotions, and it's just the perfect score. Everything's so perfect. He did create big tunes and individual sort of star turns, but his scores are intricate and detailed things, and they are perfect to me. As we move on now, what we start to see in the 20th century is composers moving away from writing for their stars, although, as I said, we do, of course, hold on to the superstar singers that became household names, singing the earlier sort of romantic roles. So we get people like Maria Callas, Placido Domingo, Pavarotti, but we do see new writing, and so someone like Wagner, of course, was writing. He was writing in Germany. Was still very heavily into the drama, but we see there's almost like a turning back to those early days, that sort of wanting to hold on to the drama. We do see composers experimenting with tonality in the 20th century, but we also see psychodramas of great power. Something like Peter Grimes, written in 1945 by Benjamin Britten. And then across the pond, we have composers such as George Gershwin and Leonard Bernstein, bringing more popular music, so Porgy and Bess and Candide, to America, which then, you know, crossed globally. We have Stravinsky during this time, and then someone like Poulenc, who returned to sort of neoclassical roots. So he was echoing the forms and styles used by by Mozart, or Haydn, but seeing this through a 20th century lens. So we're moving back to the sort of camerata ideals. The drama and music, there's a shift in focus. And there's also sort of a split in the 20th century, as there's a new genre that arises, which is the musical theatre genre, which is bringing entertainment again to the mass market. And with the invention of microphones and technology, it really remains quite a very different genre today. Yes, the constraints on performers are very different. So a musical theatre performer would use a microphone, and we are unmiked as opera singers. And so it continues. Musical theatre split off and opera continued. So what does a 21st century career look like? Well, throughout history, there have always been troupes of opera singers working with composers. There have been countless examples of opera singers being supported by rich patrons, and obviously we have the superstar mega singers, particularly those of the 18th century castrati. And of course, we still have international opera singers, those household names such as Renee Fleming, Anna Netrebko, Bryn Tervel. And so some of this still exists, but what does my 21st century opera career look like? Well, I started the profession in the year 2000, so I've only ever known a 21st century opera career. In July 2000, it was just before I started my opera training, so I initially went to the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama in Cardiff, and then the Royal Academy of Music in London. And I'd been lucky enough to gain a role with an opera company. So I was brought up in Somerset, and there's a company called Wedmore Opera who employ amazing professional singers. And then, like some other opera companies in this country, and probably it's a worldwide thing, that then the chorus are amateur, so it's got this community feel and it's got a great mix, so people are learning a lot from the professionals. And I was so lucky to get a role. It was the first time I'd ever met professional opera singers, the first time I'd ever met a living composer, and it started my love affair for all things contemporary writing. The composer that I was working with was a composer called Mike Westbrook, who is a prominent jazz composer, and the opera was recorded live on BBC Radio 3, and what an incredible introduction to this art form, and this would shape my career to come. So the training for opera singers at the beginning of the 21st century remained very traditional, and to be honest, to begin with, I couldn't understand some of the old-fashioned ways and customs of the profession. for example, why were heels and dresses and suits for the men compulsory, seemingly, for auditions? And this is something I still see, and something I still can't get my head around. If I'm auditioning, let's say, for the cunning little vixen, for the role of an animal, a fox, the vixen, and then why do I need to wear a pair of towering heels? I doubt this would translate well into the costume for the stage. So this is just one of the examples of formalities that didn't seem to exist in the world of straight theatre at the beginning of the 21st century. And so opera still remains sort of behind in many ways, but we are getting there. I also found that I couldn't understand why I focused so much on the drama, that side of the craft, while like other singers would be prepared to stand and sing what we call in the profession as park and bark. But as I settled into my training and into my early career, and actually even now, even sort of more recently, I've really learned a lot, and I realised that the beauty of the human voice is everything. The line, the craft that goes into this part is so important. I can't just rely on being a good actor. So that golden period we were talking about, that bel canto period, the beautiful singing, that period, the relationship with the audience and the performers and what they demanded from the music, that remained, and this shift in focus has remained to today's audience members. So, of course, today's audience members want to be moved emotionally by the human voice. Like we said, it's what sets it apart from the other art forms. We're looking for colour, we're looking at technique, control, the line, the beauty. And I feel that I really know now that that is what I have to tune into, and everything else has already been built around that. At the beginning of the 21st century, there were many discussions, and there still are, about the relevancy of opera for today's times. And specifically the question, is opera a dying art form? Well, in the year 2004, I chose to write my final dissertation discussing this very matter. And, well, 17 years on, we are still here, although it feels like during this pandemic we're only just here. But I do think it is an art form that will remain and remains relevant and important. As I mentioned earlier, I love the historical looking back, almost academically, to study for the traditional roles such as Handel or Mozart roles. But I also love to work with the technical demands, particularly of the bel canto period, the composers of Donizetti and Bellini. And, you know, I absolutely also love the opportunity to shine in the roles of Verdi and Puccini, those sort of star vehicles. But what really gets me is alive composers. Working with 21st century composers gives me a real buzz. Maybe just like the Camerati got when they first experimented with the earliest forms of opera. It can be slightly experimental in terms of tonality or the scoring of instruments underneath me, and it can be very hard to learn the demanding roles. After all, this is new music and there's no recording available out there. There's no learning by ear. There's no quick fix. But it often gets me so close to the drama, and it's so detailed in its demands for good interpretation, for good acting. As I mentioned right at the start, opera is an expensive art form. Just think of the forces involved. Instrumentalists, singers, designers, movement directors. There's directors, lighting, potentially huge sets. And if you're running a building, the cost of that I mean, there's so many discussions, it's for a talk for another time, but take a company like English National Opera and their home, the Colosseum, which is so large, and the struggle that they face to survive. It's really expensive. And sometimes you even have to buy the rights to put on the music as well. So what is the 21st century way around this? Is it can be to write monodramas. And this has hugely helped me in my career. This sort of small scale, one woman setup has been a winning formula for me. So it allows me time to work intricately with a director, with a musical director. And it also allows the producing company to offer affordable opera to people and to produce modern, relevant dramas, and to offer sort of the intimacy that you might not get from larger scale works. And talking about intimacy, an amazing thing about the 21st century British opera scene, and actually indeed theatre scene, is that we have an incredibly strong fringe offering here in this country. And for me, the most prolific producing company at this level is Opera Up Close. Opera Up Close does exactly what it says on the tin. When you work for them, you have the chance of getting up really close and personal. My first experience for them was at the King's Head Pub Theatre in Islington, and that is a tiny venue where at times I have literally sat on the audience. But it allowed me to cut my teeth in so many interpretations of classic roles. Everything that they do is translated into modern English, and the orchestra is cut down to the bare bones, maybe only a few instruments. The other thing that we have in this country, which is great, is contemporary opera festivals like Grimebourne and Tete a Tete, and it gives a hungry contemporary fan like me even more opportunities to work with living 21st century composers. So, what is the downside of mostly working with alive composers? Well, for a start, it's a really niche world. Opera gets written and maybe only performed a couple of times, and you might never get invited to sing it again. And also by its very nature, it's often quite small in scale, and it can be a work in progress. So it can almost be sort of paid rehearsals, where you obviously can't command the fees that you could singing Madame Butterfly at the Met in New York. So what does a 21st century opera singer do when you love that work? Well, you branch out, you juggle jobs, you make sure that you continue to be resilient. When I continued my opera training at the Royal Academy, after a short break, it was probably about 2006, I applied for my TfL London Underground busking licence. And this, although not very normal for an opera singer, gave me the opportunity to meet the whole of London. So tourists, business professionals, arts lovers, arts haters, homeless people, tube drivers, construction workers, the whole of London. And it allowed me to gain a following and also to top up my wages. And most importantly, it allowed me to feel like I was bringing opera to the people, to the masses, which is something that is still very important to me. I believe that opera shouldn't just be for the elitist, the elite. It should be for everyone, no matter whether you are drawn to it as an academic pursuit or you're drawn to it because of the emotion and the way it touches you. I was very young, and I hardly go out now, but I do still have my licence, and although sadly the scheme is not live during these lockdown times. And while I was young like this, exploring the creative landscape of our country, at this time I also sang in a restaurant in Battersea once a week. I literally sang for my supper and then would be given a wage packet at the end of my shift. And I would get on the 44 bus home and I would be tired and happy, but I was tired because I was also working a full-time job during the day in the city. those years were completely crazily full of anything and everything that I could cram into my waking hours, but it allowed me to be creative, to keep inspired, to earn money whilst I was juggling my first important roles that were coming to me. And today I continue to juggle many jobs. In my heart, I am an opera singer as much as I can be, and I'm a complete stage animal. It's where I'm happiest. It's where I'm my most creative. But opera is difficult. It really is an international. You have to really think internationally for your career, and especially in these times, these sort of post-Brexit times as well. It's really difficult to think internationally because we don't know still, what the touring rules are, and there are some European houses that won't now touch sort of fledgling British careers and not interested in auditioning us, and it's a really tough time, and you've got to keep thinking internationally. But what do you do to keep your career alive in this country, and with doing such a specific job that seems at times so niche? Well, I do a lot of outreach work with community groups. I work a lot with people with dementia, and also at the other end of the scale with young people and with learning. And the dementia work is so interesting to me. They found out that those suffering with Alzheimer's and dementia really latent level, that they found that the last part of the brain to shut down is the part of the brain that recognises music. And it's amazing to work with people, and you might go into a room and family members and carers are perhaps feeling pretty down because their loved one or their patient is almost in a catatonic state, is almost asleep and not responding at all. And then we can start a session, and we can get people to suddenly sing along with songs that they haven't sung to for years, important songs, part of their childhood, part of their growing up, and this can sort of reset people for their day-to-day life, and can have such a huge impact, not just on them but also the carers and their loved ones. So I work a lot with Opera Holland Park doing that kind of work. We go to care homes like lunch clubs, hospitals, hospices. I also work with Age UK, and I've worked with the Worshipful Company of Skinners with their almshouses, and hope that a programme can continue there, and we can just continue that work, because I think it really is so important. For me, it's not just about singing to thousands of people, which of course, we all love the applause, and I love the glamour, and I love a costume fitting. It's the favourite part of my life, to suddenly go to a big warehouse somewhere and you find yourself in an ex-BBC period drama costume and you're about to go on stage and sing for thousands of people. I love that, but I also love seeing the whites of people's eyes. I love feeling the connection with someone through expressing yourself with music, and how some of these words and some of this music that has been written hundreds and hundreds of years ago can still touch people today. And that's where I believe that opera is the just most brilliant art form. Most of my peers, when they're not singing, they teach singing. And I do a bit of that as well. But my 21st century approach to is to actually juggle some sensible options, more sensible day jobs. So, currently I work for a recruitment business, recruiting for private household staff. And then I also work for, or have done off and on for years, a financial magazine, working on the production side of things, so sort of the layout of the magazine using design packages, and that's quite good because I can do that. So I currently have a job on a Thursday night that works overnight, so it doesn't interfere with anything, and I can still just keep a bit of normality, a bit of stability in my life, and also, I used to work as a private secretary to a former Prime Minister of Pakistan. And do you know what? All of these jobs have, although made me very tired trying to juggle everything, have worked because what I do is so niche, and I think I've found a lot of support in my life for that. I often say it's almost like employing me is like employing an Olympic athlete. You don't have to know how much training I'm doing outside of my job. You just have to sometimes allow me to go to race meets, my equivalent of the Olympics every now and then. I have always made friends with local friendly vicars and church communities wherever I've lived or near where I've worked, perhaps in the city. And you get so much kindness. Like, a key to a church is so valuable to me because, of course, I can practice my singing before work. I can literally take these muscles, because just like an athlete, it's just like taking a muscle out for a run. I need to keep this in working order so I can do all of this training and then go on and do my job when the work comes in. So yeah, I think definitely comparisons can be drawn with employing an Olympic athlete who, and for many of them, they definitely do need a sensible day job alongside their sport. So what does my career look like during lockdown? Well, the arts have been hit really badly, and I'm really grateful that I have juggled so many jobs during my life, because it's really brought me some security during this difficult time. And, I've managed to continue as many jobs as possible, including a lot of the outreach work that can be done on Zoom, and a recording of recitals. I recorded a one-woman opera on a closed set on a stage, and also for Grange Park Opera, I was part of an amazing new writing piece called Feast at the Time of Plague, and it was such a great opportunity. I got to work with the most incredible international singers of note, and it's because these singers were British, were locked down sort of in Britain and unable to take on work internationally. So we had these big sort of starry names that were suddenly available, and I was able to work and learn from them, and it was just the most incredible experience. And so that was September 2020, and that has kept me going. And also I have my hypnotherapy qualification, my diploma, and that's something that I got interested in when I was a student. It really helped me with stage fright, and again, I suppose that is a 21st century perhaps attitude, is that we really do need to look after ourselves sort of with our mental health, as well as understanding the sort of coaching side of things and keeping ourselves healthy, not just physically but also mentally. And during this time I have worked a lot with other people in the arts who've really been struggling, particularly with anxiety, as a lot of the work has dried up, and particularly people who have found themselves in a different position to me, in that they haven't juggled other things. They've relied entirely on being an opera singer, and suddenly when you pull that rug out from someone's feet, where does that leave them? And it's been really nice during this time to give that back. The other thing that is happening to me at the moment during these lockdown times is I'm actually pregnant, and this was something that I was really worried about for such a long time, because I was worried about being written off by the profession for that, and also the effects that it might have on my voice, which you can't get away from. The way our voices work, it's linked, the pitch of our voice, as we knew from the castrati days, was, it's related to our hormones, and I was so worried, and a lot of my sort of bread and butter is my ability to sing really, really super high notes. And Actually, you know, at the moment I can confirm it is very difficult to get up there to the really super mega high notes. But that slight shortening of my register hasn't been as much of a problem for me as I thought, partly because it's been locked down and there hasn't been so much going on, but also, you know, that there are other great advantages, like my voice there's more places for my voice to resonate now within my body, and the quality of the sound is much more womanly, and I hope that this is a positive nod to the future. Also, my diaphragm is really squished up at the moment as it like moves up into the rib cage, and you know, that's really difficult too, but I really think I feel positive, and what will happen is that as the hormones settle after the birth, everything should go back to normal, and what you might be able to hold on to is some of the richer qualities in the sound, but of course we just don't know that until then. So I think, as hopefully you've gained from this talk that being a freelancer is not always easy, and my goodness, like, but as a 21st century career, a 21st century sort of portfolio working career, it's brought me so many unique experiences. I've taken on so much sort of random corporate gigs. I've done big, huge banquets. I've sung on the roof of the Old Vic, on a double-decker bus in the middle of the Cotswolds. I've sung at the Vatican, and then of course, you know, the more traditional singing of over, you know, thousands of people in an opera house. And thinking about this talk has really made me proud of everything that I have managed to achieve, and so this time has done me a great favour. And so what does the future hold for me? Well, I mean, hopefully a baby in a couple of weeks, and then a plan to return to my singing life. My first contract back is May or June, and it will be actually recording an opera for babies and young children for Opera Holland Park. So I'll keep you posted. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me. I'm Sarah with an H at sarahminns.com. So Minns is MINN for November, S for Sierra. And it'd be great to keep in touch. And you can also have a look at my website, www.sarahminns.com, and you'll be able to see some of my performances there and some more information about me. And thank you so much for listening to me today, for giving me the time, and I hope that you can stay well and safe, and I hope to see you all very, very soon in person. Thank you so much for listening, and take care.